Prepare yourself. You are stepping into a pivotal threshold, a moment where words cease to be just words, and thought becomes a channel for transformation. Everything that felt scattered, compartmentalized, or distracted begins to converge toward a single point of clarity. Mercury meets Jupiter at the 29th degree of Gemini. And this isn't just an aspect, it's an event. Rare, irreversible, and quietly pulsating. You won't see it, but you'll feel it in your body, in your thoughts, in the sudden realization that your current decisions may be far too small for what's actually unfolding. This conjunction doesn't just happen in the sign of the mind, it happens in the final degree, the place of culminations, closures, and transitions. And if you really listen, the space around you begins to sound different. It's as if the cosmos gathers every part of your experience, your words, beliefs, and ideas, and asks a single question: which of these are truly alive? This type of alignment doesn't happen every year. Yes, Mercury and Jupiter meet regularly, but at this exact degree, almost never. It's like the click of an inner mechanism, something that happens once per cycle. And if that click aligns with your personal rhythm, it begins to rewrite the way your mind works. No warnings, no explanations. On days like these, reality can behave strangely. You may think thoughts that haven't visited you in years, or feel long-held desires fade into nothing, as if they were never truly yours. Something falls away. Something crystallizes. Something lights up with a single word. And that word is enough to change everything. Why now? Why do some moments feel like a leap in consciousness that would usually take years of inner work? And why isn't it available to everyone? I'll speak more on that soon. But for now, here is what matters most. The energy of this conjunction is already active. It doesn't ask if you're ready. It simply erases everything that no longer rings true. And if you feel a strange stillness within you, the kind that comes before something important begins, then you're already tuned to the frequency. There are days when your thoughts no longer belong to you alone. They don't come because you summoned them. They arrive because the space around you decided it's time. June 8th is one of those days, when Mercury, the carrier of words, ideas, and logic, meets Jupiter, the bearer of meaning, belief, and expansion. In the final degree of Gemini, thoughts lose their private boundaries. They become current, a clear, transparent wave that flows through you, brushing the dust off inner frameworks. This isn't a conversation, it's a leap, because whatever you say in that moment begins shaping a new reality. Even if you say it lightly, offhandedly, half in jest, the field listens. It doesn't weigh the seriousness of your tone. It responds to the vibration within. And if, on this day, you speak a truth that's been quietly alive in you for some time, it activates. A word becomes an action. An intention becomes a direction. But if you keep repeating borrowed truths, speaking in language that no longer feels true, hiding behind phrases you've long stopped believing, reality starts to unravel, not as punishment, but as refusal. It will simply stop responding to what no longer matches your frequency. This is a day of mental clarity, but not the kind that comes from careful thought. It's the kind that arrives as a sudden, unmistakable yes, or a final, non-negotiable no. A day when you can hear yourself without distortion, no filters, no edits, to hear and not be afraid. Because every new life begins with a new thought, and if that thought has arrived, it cannot be stopped. At the 29th degree, any conjunction is not about stability. It's about release, like a cry before silence, or silence before the word that can no longer remain unspoken. Mercury dissects, Jupiter unifies, and in Gemini, they become a mirror, not to reflect, but to awaken, a flash of insight you didn't plan for, yet suddenly it illuminates everything. Not a trail of logic, a resonance, a moment in which you see just how much of your inner life has been held up not by truth, but by the habit of thinking a certain way. And if layers have built up, beliefs that no longer serve, dogmas that exhaust you, logic woven from fear, this is the moment they begin to crack. Not because you're trying to free yourself, but because their vibration can no longer hold under the frequency that has entered your field. This is a day when logic yields to revelation. When you realize that no amount of analysis can explain what you now feel as knowing. Not logical knowing, whole body knowing, the kind that doesn't need proof. You simply know that it's time to stop or time to move. That a phrase you've repeated for years has lost all power. That a story you've been telling yourself no longer holds you together. It's not a decision, it's a shift, a deep inner movement that doesn't ask your permission. Sometimes it comes as anxiety, sometimes as inspiration, but in either case, it signals the same truth. The structure within you is beginning to dissolve if it no longer serves your growth. Mercury is the thought you can name. Jupiter is the meaning you can't ignore. Together, they create a field where any dishonesty with yourself starts to sound false, and any truth gains power, even without external validation. On days like these, words become dangerous, but in truth, it wasn't you who chose the thought. It was the space that allowed it to enter. It opened only when you could no longer cling to the old. And this is where the unique nature of this conjunction reveals itself. It takes place at 29 degrees, 45 minutes of Gemini, a point rarely spoken of, yet impossible not to feel. This is not the end. It's the edge, the boundary between a familiar sign and a leap into another dimension. The final degree is always a culmination, a moment where meaning compresses, like the last inhale before stepping into the unknown. At points like these, a deeper principle is activated. You no longer make the decisions. The field does. The frequency does. Reality itself does, assessing what you've brought with you and choosing what to sustain and what to release. The 29th degree of Gemini is a threshold where all your knowledge, logic, plans, and inner dialogues are tested for aliveness. What still vibrates in harmony with who you're becoming? And what are just words now, empty of warmth, stripped of truth? The space doesn't punish, it realigns. It simply stops feeding what no longer resonates with your center. At this point, you may feel the ground shift beneath your feet. Thoughts that once rang clear now sound dull. Goals that were sharp lose their definition. Desires that once drove you begin to dissolve. This is not failure. It's not confusion. It's the moment when the power of the old structure begins to fade, because it can no longer lead you forward. You may have spent years building something, striving toward a vision, believing, hoping. But the 29th degree is not where you harvest. It's where you are asked, is what you were working toward still truly yours? The field doesn't wait for explanations. It simply scans. If it matches, it flows. If it doesn't, it disconnects. It feels like an internal pause, a strange stillness where you can no longer think in old patterns, as if the mental wires have been cut. And in that silence, a possibility appears, not to continue, but to rewrite, not to correct the root, but to choose an entirely new dimension of thought. If you try to save the old structure, to think the way you used to, convince yourself of what once made sense, hold on to meanings whose time has passed, you'll feel it. The energy stops moving, as if it's gone, as if everything inside goes dim when you speak the language of the past. At this point, your decisions become useless if they're born of habit. Only a truthful inner response will pass through the filter of the field. If the thought isn't truly yours, it won't echo. If the path is rooted in fear, it won't continue. If the goal is no longer alive, it will simply vanish from view. That can be frightening. It may feel like everything that once held you together is slipping away. But in reality, only what was blocking your growth is dissolving. The final degree isn't collapse. It's crystallization. A point where everything either becomes vividly alive or fades into silence. On this day, you don't make a choice. You simply find yourself in a reality where lying to yourself is no longer possible. And that is a blessing. Because only from that honesty can a new level of thinking emerge, a new meaning, a new code. And if you allow it to happen, what opens ahead will not just be a path. It will be a thought that is no longer yours, but greater than you. At this point, only one thing remains: to discern what within you still holds power and what no longer resonates. Because from here on, effort doesn't work. Desire goes unheard. Logic becomes irrelevant. This energy does not respond to striving. It only responds to precision. And precision isn't about perfection. It's about alignment. When what you think, feel, and emit vibrates on the same frequency. No distortion, no forcing. That's when, even in the most fragile silence, something solid begins to form. Not from the outside, but from within. But if, inside, there's still a desperate attempt to hold on to an old worldview you've already outgrown, if you keep calling normal what no longer inspires you, if at the core of your being there's anxiety, compromise, or a thought repeated out of fear, then the space will begin to withdraw. The world won't fight you. It will simply stop holding shape. On days like this, everything begins to fall away. Not loudly, but with exactness. What was running on inertia falls silent. What you sustained out of politeness breaks off. What once felt stable loses its outline. This is not a crisis. This is a field adjustment. You find yourself inside a kind of filter. Everything that no longer aligns with your real self simply stops passing through. But if, within you, there is even one clear thought you're no longer afraid to admit, one honest truth that makes the inside of you go quiet and strong, that becomes your anchor. Not a plan, not a to-do list, not the perfect version of who you think you should be. Just a single inner knowing. This is mine, and I will not abandon it. And around that one point, forms begin to gather. At first, invisibly, as if nothing's happening. Then, a sign, a chance meeting, an unexpected phrase. A thread begins to pull you exactly where you're meant to be. Because the field doesn't hear your explanations. It hears your purity. This isn't the time to act. It's the time to stop distorting your signal. It's not lies that distort it. It's doubt. When you want change, but don't believe you deserve it. When you say yes, but inside whisper, just don't make it worse. When you dream, but prepare for rejection in advance. That is the static that blocks the space from forming a new structure around you. But purity is not volume. Purity is accuracy. It doesn't need words. It needs alignment. That's why everything feels so sharp right now. Those who keep thinking the old way will hear nothing. Those who stay silent out of fear will remain in the pause. But those who dare, even for a moment, to name their truth without decoration, they activate movement. Not external, but internal. An internal movement is the most precise there is. It asks for no guarantees. It demands no proof. It simply leads, without maps, without signs, but always home. And if right now you can hear a phrase inside you that you've long hidden, if you feel it's time to finally speak what you've never said aloud, if you've come to realize exactly where you've changed and no longer want to pretend, that is the ignition point. You're no longer guessing. You're already tuned in to a frequency not everyone can hear. And it's that frequency around which a new reality begins to gather. Effortless, uncomplicated, unfakeable. Remember how I said earlier that this day holds the potential for a leap in consciousness, the kind that usually takes years of inner work, that it's not available to everyone, and that it's only possible now. It's time to explain why. The truth is, this day is not a gift. It's a point of release, an irreversible conjunction of Mercury and Jupiter at the final degree of Gemini, not a reward, but the culmination of countless inner cycles. It's a click in the system, a final calibration, one that's been silently forming through your observations, mistakes, honesty, and illusions. Now, in a single moment, it all rises to the surface. But here's the essence. In this point, there's nowhere left to hide. The space doesn't impose, it reveals. If you're ready, you don't receive a flood of knowledge. You receive something deeper, inner clarity. And if you're not ready, nothing happens. Except this. The world goes strangely quiet. Everything that once felt bright, full, meaningful, begins to fade. This isn't punishment. It's disconnection from illusion. The portal doesn't open by desire. It opens through precision. This is not a power day in the usual sense. This is a filtering day. And through this filter, noise doesn't pass. Busy work doesn't pass. Trying to be someone doesn't pass. Rituals, to-do lists, dramatic declarations, none of it makes it through, because all of it is external noise. But the portal hears something else entirely. It responds to one single state, your willingness to be yourself without distortion. That's why these moments feel like sharp mental shifts, not because you suddenly became stronger, but because everything blocking your clarity has fallen away. And if, on this day, you're not clinging to the past, not gripping old logic, not convincing yourself to believe the familiar, you pass through without noise, without triumph. You simply pass through. But what if you resist? What if fear rises, confusion sets in, and you hold tightly to a worldview already cracking? The space doesn't argue. It just dims the signal. You stop feeling resonance. Thought lines snap. Words lose power. Connections grow heavy. This is the rupture, not as punishment, but as a quiet withdrawal of support. And that is why not everyone can access it, because many will try to reassert control, rebuild the old order, restore what once was. But this day isn't for those who hold on. It's for those who align. The June 8th portal marks the end of an old mental framework. You have two options. Step into a new one, guided by a clear thought, an alive truth, a spark of honesty, or remain in the void, not because you're unready, but because you're still hoping to walk through wearing a mask. Knowledge doesn't work here if it's only accumulated. Meditation doesn't work here if it's driven by fear. Intention doesn't work here if it's laced with anxiety. Only one thing works: an inner alignment with a truth you no longer run from, even if that truth is small, even if it unravels everything, even if you have no idea how to live from it yet. If you acknowledge it, the portal opens, not outward, inward. And then things begin to unfold, things beyond explanation. You suddenly hear a word that shifts your direction. You understand a truth you've missed for years. You release an old idea, and answers arrive because the noise is gone. And finally, you're the one who's resonating. That's how a mental leap is born, not from striving, but from stillness, not from ambition, but from honesty. And if that honesty is present, you're already inside. Great turning points don't always arrive with noise. Sometimes they hide inside a pause, in a subtle shift of thought, in the quiet knowing that you simply can't go back to what was, not because someone told you not to, but because inside, there's no longer a response. June 8th is not a culmination. It's a point of ignition. This day doesn't bring answers. It makes you a channel for a new frequency. And if even the smallest thread of clarity begins to vibrate within you, however faint, however fragile, everything ahead will begin to form around that. This isn't magic. It's the physics of subtle realms. What is in resonance amplifies. What is false dissolves without a trace. And if, on this day, you hear a thought that rings with truth, even if it breaks down what came before, you can no longer unhear it. Because once truth has spoken, it doesn't let go. It reshapes everything, even if, on the surface, nothing has changed. And from that moment on, you are no longer where you were, simply because your way of thinking has shifted. And that means the world will begin to change, not according to promises, but in response to your inner frequency. And everything else, it will catch up.